And here is the QR code and link to join. All right. Our guest for next week is Jitendra Choksi. For those of you who have ever run into a company called Fitter, which is pretty big in India and has a lot of customers in the US. It was started by Jitendra Choksi, and JC, as he is known, has been pretty vocal, critic of the amount of disinformation and misinformation in this space. And I think a conversation with him is always quite entertaining, in addition to being very, very insightful. So please do make it a point to join this conversation next week at the same time. But to today's guest, and one I've been very, very excited about having, and that's Miklu. Miklu has done a lot which this bio doesn't do justice to. But I want to give my own introduction to Miklu. I had a chance to get to know Miklu I think maybe almost a year back, if I'm not mistaken. And it was through a common friend. And that conversation, it was one of those conversations where what was supposed to be a half-an-hour conversation became much longer. And that led to a number of follow-on conversations where we spoke about anything and everything to do with health. But what struck me the most about the conversations and about Miklu in general is the fact that what he's doing is not just a job for him. It's something that is deeply ingrained in how he thinks about health, about life, the whole philosophy. It's a pretty comprehensive, well-rounded view of things. And so each time we have a chat, it ends up being something that I walk away with a lot more knowledgeable than I was before I walked in. And to me, that's the hallmark of a great conversation. And I really hope in today's conversation, you all have that same feeling that I've had over the last year or so. And so not only was Miklu one of the early designers of the Apple Watch and an integral member of that team, he's also been a very, very critical part. In fact, he was dragged out of retirement to focus on this while he was doing a lot of other things. And all the other things he's worked on have always had a very strong design component, because I think that's his soul. That's what always gets him excited. And so without further ado, Miklu, welcome to the community podcast.
Thank you so much. It really is a privilege to be here, and I'm just very inspired by what you built together and this sense of community, and very excited to have the conversation.
Lovely. So Miklu, let's start with the beginning. I mean, you were an integral part of the Apple Watch, like I mentioned, and then now you're playing a role. It's not just about designing the Oura ring. It's about every aspect of the experience. And so maybe it'll be a good idea for us to start by hearing what your overall view and approach and philosophy has been when you go down a path like this.
Yeah, and I think that's also why I'm so happy about this current way to serve. This current position is that Oura's mission is to make health a daily practice. And when you did this very kind introduction, like, I felt like the word practice is a good way of summing up that, like, sort of totalitarian but also open-hearted investigation of what is it that you do. And that's where my personal curiosity, that probably in some ways started in childhood, growing up in a family of healthcare professionals, where that sort of started. And now I arrived to a very organic place where my sort of passion for design and my deep curiosity and personal commitment for living a vibrant, healthy life genuinely meet.
Yeah, and I think, you brought up something that's always an observation I've had about you, which is you live a healthy life regardless of the wearable. The wearable then is another avenue that you use to be able to live it. So it's almost like you eat your own dog food, right? You're not putting anything in that you would not use yourself.
That's correct, and I do think there's been a number of sort of what I would almost call fractures in our own awareness of like how is it that we're doing as human beings, and how our friends and family is doing that has come largely, or at least some degree, as a byproduct of our investment and relationship with technology. So our like ability to self-reflect and know how we're doing is actually somewhat fractured because of technology to begin with. And then I think it's just really, really interesting that equally technology can be this really powerful tool. So where I am generally quite aware of like, did I sleep well last night, or was the food that I ate actually suitable for myself? Like, it's quite hard to have an understanding of the biological age of my cardiovascular system related to my chronological age, which is then where tools like Oura Ring can be both really powerful in guiding you to do the right things, but also immensely motivating.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I've found is you want technology to be an able assistant, not something that overwhelms you, not something that makes you feel less, right? It has to make you feel more, not less. And that, I think, is where the real magic of the wearable lies. When it becomes transparent, when it becomes an integral part of your practice,
Yeah,
that's when it becomes magic.
very true. One of those like early framings from Steve Jobs that stuck my mind as a kid growing up was that he had called the computer a bicycle for the mind. And I loved the bicycle, and the sense of kind of efficiency and momentum, and the tool like nature. I can go further, I can see more because of this thing that I actually even love framing. So I think there could have not been a better framing for computers as tools for understanding and being able to do more. And then, even though smart rings are currently categorized as smart rings, but really they are these like small health computers that are tool for navigating everyday life in a more kind of dynamic and vibrant way. And I think this idea of like it being vibrant and health being more than just the absence of sickness is quite important. So early on, when I started to get more invested in the area of health, like one definition that was quite sort of impactful was this idea that health is the ability to live your dreams. So I would almost like put those two together, that you have this tool like thing that's kind of like the bicycle for the mind, but then the goal is to really be able to live your dreams, which is different from like, you know, we have all kinds of conditions and we can still do quite a lot in this world and in this life.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's such a powerful statement. Trying to live your dreams, it almost feels like a marketing statement. But if you are willing to embrace it, one of the ways I find personally, uh, we all sometimes lack that motivation to go do that strength training, go for that extra run. And I finally found something that motivates me in a positive way. And that is, I keep thinking about, I don't want to have to use a walking stick when I'm in my 70s, or have someone pick me up to take me from one place to the other. And uh, that is a very powerful motivation. My dream in what you just said is to be able to live as independent a life as I can. That doesn't feel like a great dream, but when you see your parents go through it, I think you realize that is going to one day be me. And so, how do I push it out as much as possible and hopefully, prevent it, but at least delay it as much as possible? And I think that's a pretty meaningful dream, won't you say?
I would say like it's as much about living longer as it is living better. That it's like, and I would also go on to say that as I've gotten a little bit older, I now find that repeatedly the most inspiring people in my life are very old. That just that there is indeed actually a way of like continuing to grow at least in wisdom and presence, that isn't interconnected with our physical age at all. And that I find very inspiring, and maybe also like a big motivation for me personally to see if that kind of growth is possible. And obviously that is also related to how fit your body is, that all of those, like, let's say, people that I met in their 80s that have this deep wisdom, it's also very clear that they really invested in their physical well-being, even if they, are maybe appreciated for their contribution mostly because of either intellectual or spiritual or some combination of those two things point of view.
Yeah, in fact, there was a very interesting thing I recently learned, and that is, like you said, if we want to be at our mental best or our spiritual best, the physical has to also be in pretty good shape. Otherwise, you can't think clearly. And one way I've just recently learned about quantifying that, right? Because this is a nice concept, but if you try to quantify it, here is an interesting way to think about it. We talk about VO2 max, right? And VO2 max is spoken about as, I want it to be like 45 and I want it to be 50. But there is a line called the frailty line, right? Below which you cannot do anything of significance. You can't use your, mind clearly because you're struggling with just your physical body. And for men, it is a VO2 max of 18. And for women, it is 16. Now, every decade, your VO2 max decays by about 10%, right? Which means if you want to be above the frailty line of, you can't be at 18, you better be at about at least 24, 25 to be meaningful. In your 40s, you better be in your 40s, right? In your age group of 40s, your VO2 max better be around 40 or more, so that if you live into your 80s and hopefully 90s, you're still above the frailty line. And I think that is a pretty powerful motivator to ensure that you're doing all the things that allow you to stay above the frailty line. Right?
Well said.
And so, if we look at wearables, if we look at the Oura, and this is true of the Apple Watch and every other device, while most people still usually use the number of steps and they're trying to close the rings or stuff like that, there are so many markers and metrics that are captured by the wearable. While steps are one easy one, what are the others that you look at, Miklu, as you think about going down the path of building out a whole experience of wearables for consumers?
That's a great question, and quite a deep, and I would navigate this from, I guess, like, I'll explain like how I classify these, and this is now less about maybe biometrics and even health. We'll get to that, and please ask further questions if where you want to steer this. But usually my first classification is that there's like a category of things that are universal qualities of being a human. And then there's like a category of things that are sort of N of one matters of taste, let's say, that, universally people like good food and spending time with their favorite people. But which restaurant and what kind of people like that, that's very different. So that kind of guides a lot about how I think about, let's say, app design, or how should we deliver these capabilities. Then broad strokes again, like there's real value in providing like a humble beginning. Even when I find like some of the most sophisticated, able people in the world, oftentimes they have the most simple, rudimentary questions about like, how do I get started with a better diet, right? So then I'm always looking for these like almost like baby steps. Like what little things can you get in motion so that you get some kind of positive spiral or positive interest or positive practice started. That's where I think the sleep metric is so effective, that it quickly reveals, for example, the price for a glass of wine late in the evening, or these tiny things that people then recognize, and they start to make small adjustments, and they start to feel a little bit better, and then they go deeper and deeper and get more and more motivated to understand. All the way in the other end is like maybe like the original like quantified self movement, that I would almost say like is so motivated that while they will always be stack ranking somehow the importance of these metrics, I think they have almost like an endless amount for new vectors to understand. And then personally, I think the most valuable things, the ones that are most motivating for me, are the ones that are the most hidden in some ways, because that's where you need a little bit help, where you feel like you dedicated practice has a very positive investment to result ratio. And cardiovascular age, which is one of like Oura Magic Sauce functions, is such a feature, because like a few weeks of dedicated effort can actually shave off years of the biological age of your cardiovascular system. And I think that ratio, like, it's something I wouldn't otherwise see. Simple action has a really profound health benefit. It's kind of like the ideal combination of the kind of features that I want to build more and more.
Yeah. So, I want to sort of double click on what you just said, Miklu, because I think about markers like sleep. Even if I did not measure my sleep, and in fact, this is one of the fun things I do. Every morning when I wake up, I try to guess what my sleep score must have been before I look at it. So I guess my sleep score, I guess how much of it must be deep, how much of it is REM, and what my resting heart rate was, and what my HRV was. These are the 5 metrics I try to guess. Okay? And then I open the app and I look at it. And, while the numbers may not always be perfect, I find that I can guess my sleep score to plus or minus 2 units. So the days it is 82, I would have said, yeah, it's probably 80, 84. Whereas some other things, whereas deep and REM sleep is very hard to guess, because by definition, you're so deep asleep, you can't be really figuring out how. I can only do it based on, I woke up and I'm feeling quite rested. I must have had good amount of deep sleep, right? So I look at things like sleep or steps. These are things that one can have an estimate for, but then the wearable provides you more specific guidance. And then you have the second bucket that you spoke about, which is stuff like cardiovascular age. Okay? You cannot guess your cardiovascular age because it's not an intuitive thing. There is no way to know. And maybe it's worthwhile, Miklu, talking a little bit about the cardiovascular age marker specifically, because I think it is part of the Oura magic. I believe that because I use it. And B, because there is so much happening inside the body that the cardiovascular age is one of those markers which provides you feedback that, all that, going to bed earlier and eating better, it's almost like this integrated marker that shows you whether all the things you have been doing are translating into your health getting better. And I think what really makes that marker stand out in my mind is it's not some sort of algorithmic, let me take your weight and your height and your heart rate and come up with a number, right? It is actually looking at the inside, that is looking at your arteries and arterial stiffness, right? Using the sensor. So it's a much more direct measure. And maybe talking a little bit about that will be helpful for the audience.
Yeah. And again, there might be different ways into it. Like ultimately, like my brain works in a very kind of systems way, and partly that comes from like a decade of working on computers, that you can look at the computer in a different way, but it's sort of cost, size, power, performance, puzzle that you're trying to put together. And a lot of the constraints of how you put the system together is thermals, like how much computing can happen in this envelope without it getting too hot, that being the constraint. And when you work in such a way, like you have a lot of criteria that has to be balanced, like solving 7 out of 8 criteria doesn't help, because if you don't have margin in one of them, like you have to throttle all of it down. So that's very much how I sort of naturally think about these things. And of course it's somewhat helpful that human sort of biology is also, it's a far more complicated system, but it's still like this system. And maybe the cardiometabolic, I also like to think of those together as a sort of, let's say, like a human energy usage system, brings us down to like this cardiovascular piece. And it's just becoming increasingly clear that this is a very good proxy for our overall metabolic health, and thus worth tracking. At the same time, my approach is like always being like big personal experimentation, and curiosity about how to move things, including cardiovascular age. I don't think we fully understand all of the, well, clearly we don't fully understand all of the behaviors. Like right now, I'm, for example, very curious about what difference happens when we're slightly gaining weight versus losing weight. I have certain fasting cycles that I like to work with, and I've noticed that in terms of like training, I'm also like I think all humans, it's kind of also healthy that I go through like more intense periods of training and then rest periods and more intense periods. So, and then I also like get to sample with my diet a little bit. Sometimes I'm forced to, like, let's say I do business travel and I have to be, it's there's different like criteria on this. And then sometimes I discover little things that are curious. Like I'm pretty confident that dates are a genuine superfood.
Dates.
Dates, yeah.
Yeah.
And partly it's because like I just happened to be in San Francisco on a business trip, and I usually go to Whole Foods and I grab a bunch of stuff to kind of keep me, to have a little snack at the hotel after like long days. And one time I just like bought a big, huge box of dates. I quite like them. I don't eat candy or anything sugary. And I ended up eating that whole box during the week and walking a lot. And then my cardiovascular age that week like dropped significantly, and I kept eating them and it kept dropping. And who knows, but something is clearly happening. I was walking a lot and I was eating a slightly different, I didn't do any dairy during that time. That was also part of the experiment. So I guess, like, to summarize this, like it is a very good proxy. It's worth paying attention. And then I do think you should play and find out what works for you. And I think we have also learned that, particularly when it comes to nutrition, that humans have very different systems, and what works for one person doesn't work for the next person. And then we could probably also conclude that food guidance is maybe like the original fake news. That so much of like the US messaging, American messaging around food is entirely not beneficial to people's health. So you put those things together, and I think like now we have a good proxy, and let's all please sort of experiment. And exercise is important, but nutrition is just as important.
Miklu, what would be an example of a food guidance that you have seen to be very, very wrong in the US, for example?
Yeah, I mean, just the degree of processing. That just the foods are so processed that's just like it's clearly wrong. And you see it in these such deep cycles that you can take like broccoli, and they've done research on broccoli, and they've seen that the way we farm has caused, let's say, like 50% reduction of nutrients in broccoli in the past. I don't remember how many years, but we have a lot of research on this. So it's the processing and it's the way that the farming system works that's actually making the calories that we consume far less nutrient valuable. Maybe nutrient dense isn't even the right word, but nutrient valuable. So that's probably the single biggest guidance that I think about. And then for me personally, kind of high protein, relatively high fat diet has worked really well. It keeps my mind very sharp all throughout the day. And then also have learned that as I avoid sweets and sugars and that kind of stuff, like, that creates, on top of like the, let's say, like the intellectual sharpness, it creates like an emotional stability as well, that you see it in small kids quite easily, like when they have too much birthday cake, like what happens immediately after.
Yeah. Coke and ice cream can
Yes.
ruin everything. Yeah, no, but I think your point is absolutely spot on, which is my own experience has shown that uh, having protein and fat, usually as much unsaturated fat as possible, automatically reduces the amount of carbs, simply because protein is so satiating that you can't easily eat too much more. And so the general rule of thumb I've found is, if you have enough protein and you have enough unsaturated fat, whatever carbs come along with it, with that fat, because there's always going to be carbs that come along with it, it's fine. Just don't drink your carbs, eat them.
Yeah.
And where possible, try to avoid having to open a bag
Totally.
or a bag of electricity. That's the biggest
Exactly.
process.
Yeah, and the value of fat is like it's real, and I guess like there's also a very long history of research on using fat to fuel your brain versus sugar, and like the benefits there are quite real. And one thing that a lot of our internal team was able to really spend good quality time testing when we did the integration of the real-time glucose sensors into Oura platform, was just like the difference, let's say, when you eat a piece of toast and you just eat the toast versus like if you put a lot of butter on it, like putting a lot of butter on it from all kinds of metabolic perspective is very, very beneficial. Like it really has a profoundly better glucose response benefit in your system. But again, like back to our conversation about like the fake news in nutrition, like we've been told to do, like butter is bad categorically, as an example.
Yeah. That is a whole topic in itself. um, you've now got so much data, Miklu, as the number of Aura rings out there explode. What have you seen? And you sort of referred to this N of 1, but at a trend level, men versus women, young versus old, right? I'm sure there are differences even at that sort of demographic level. What are some of the big observations, especially in the men versus women? Because that's where I think finally there is enough research that's surfacing that the term that is used now is women are not small men, right? They're a whole different physiology. So what has been your observation?
Yeah, that's beautifully said, and it's absolutely correct. And we are a women first company when it comes to our approach. Like women's physiology is more interesting and more complex than men's, so it's like makes sense to invest there. And we're somewhat unique as a sort of still an consumer electronics selling health company that 2/3 of our customers are women.
Oh, 2/3.
Yes, this is really unusual. Usually it's roughly the other way around. And so obviously women are cyclical beings, so there's a lot more like month to month variation or between that unit of month, like how their physiology is, like what works and what doesn't work. That's one difference. The whole research around perimenopause and menopause is really interesting. That's also like a shift that men don't go through, that has like maybe even more drastic dietary adjustment benefits. Like it's really important and beneficial to adjust your diet. In some ways it's the same for men as we grow older and metabolism shifts, but it's maybe more pronounced in women. Age-wise, we are also quite a young demographic, which is also interesting. That we have a lot of young women. Is, for example, like a good slice of our customers, and I would also go on to say that we are like really busy learning, because now we truly have this big data set that we can look at, and it's scaled quite fast, right? Like we sold more rings within last year than all the years before that, and we're growing really fast. So our data set and the granularity of the data and even the amount of data within the amount of people is like exponentially growing, and we have even more ambitious like raw data initiatives in place. So we are learning a lot. That's probably the clearest thing. And when it comes then back to this like N of 1 idea, is like the goal is very much that we can get to great granularity about what is it, Miklu, that works just for you, based on probably like a sample set of enough people that are most like you, which is much more relevant than the people that are the least like you, that would have been, the old way of doing medical research, and everything would have been normalized.
Yeah. And I think that is it shows up. For example, if I sleep 5 hours and my wife sleeps 5 hours, our sleep scores could be very, very different.
Yes.
Though we slept the same amount, because I'm not like her, she's not like me. And so it probably compares us to whoever we are more like.
Yeah. And maybe that's like another big thing that a lot of people had derived a lot of value out of, is like the chronotype. So are you an early morning person or a late evening person? A lot of people go through life without understanding that they have this part of their biological makeup that makes them more prone and makes one type of behavior more natural. So some really powerful stories, including in our team, when people discover that, wait a minute, like I'm a late night person, I should work a little later and stay home and sleep in, and when they make this adjustment, everything flows better. Everything flows better. Like the whole life flows better when the adjustment was maybe like doing the same things but shifting the order in which you do things, like 2 hours every day. So that's that. So like it is really quite powerful, the amount of information that we see, and how meaningfully and significantly it improves lives.
Yeah. Now, in fact, one of the things that leads to is the fact that data doesn't always drive people's behavior. Put it the right way, right? I mean, in many ways, this community was built to help each of us make more sense of the data, because sometimes data can be overwhelming. But one of the things that I know that you have focused a lot on at Aura is, how do you integrate that data into these simple, easy to understand nudges that can become part of our daily lives? Can you talk about sort of examples or the way you thought through that?
Yeah. Maybe the most important example is like the tone of voice that we use. Like we invest heavily in the writing of like how the message gets delivered and what the tone, like we want to be understanding and clear and insightful. And there's a lot of messaging that we will avoid. We don't want to ever shame people into doing something, or we also do want to have a sense of humor. We think that's important. Like that's maybe like the best example of actually us doing something in a what we would call like an Oura way that's quite unique from competition.
Yeah, no preachiness.
No preaching.
I mean, one of the things you just spoke about was sleep, right? And sleep has so many aspects. And one of the most interesting things I learned from the Aura uh, was it is not, I mean, it's one thing, of course, you need to know whether you're a morning person or a night person. In my case, I always knew I've been a morning person. And so that part, I think the Aura just validated it for me. But the most insightful thing I learned was the biggest driver, because I used to look at all the different possibilities, right? When I had my dinner, I mean, how much before my sleep time, the blue light, try to calm, all those things. But the single most critical element I found was what that 1 hour window was when I went to sleep, right? And every day the aura tells me you are
Yeah.
now in your window, right? You're approaching your window of sleep. And I found that if I can stick to that 1 hour window and as many days as possible, it almost guarantees me a high sleep score, which almost nothing else can guarantee me. But that single thing can almost guarantee me. And I thought that was a very interesting insight that didn't feel preachy, it didn't feel like a data dump. It was a simple statement. You reached that 1 hour time frame. And so that was one interesting thing. And the other thing, Miklu, that I thought I want to share with the group here is the concept of a nap, right? The nap can be a powerful thing, but it can also be a not so powerful thing depending on when you take it and how long it is, right? And this whole concept of sleep pressure, you actually, get rid of that sleep pressure that's building up if you take too long a nap. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't take a nap. It just means take a short. What is the sort of thought process, Miklu, around these aspects of sleep?
Well, it's a good segue to something we just launched, which is sleep debt. So now we actually have in the app like this feature that tracks if you are not sleeping enough. And it's also really cool and nice to then like have a good weekend and wipe out your sleep debt. Napping is interesting. Like it again is something that is quite related to individuals. Like works really well for some individuals, less well for others. Napping is known to have some like superpower effects. For example, like elite athletes, like there's just basically nothing as empowering of certain kind of muscle recovery and growth than being able to take an effective nap right after training, for example. And there are some athletes that go to crazy lengths to have multiple naps during the day, structured fully for that benefit. Actually, like Cristiano Ronaldo is somebody that, if you're ever curious, like it's worth like looking into how he has structured his whole life to be that fit at that age. It's like probably like the one of the most extreme cases, and then there are people that don't find napping suitable. So I guess that's maybe one of the areas where you should really see what works for you. And again, like I would also say that in my own experience, and also now a little bit proven by data, is that very related to your diet. Again, if you do these like really high carb, heavy meals, like you will crash, and then you will naturally nap. And that cycle is not very good for your metabolic health. It's like better to have like a slightly different nutrient dense meal and then go immediately for a walk. Like walking is, this better than anybody I know, like what a superpower walking is.
Yeah, absolutely. um, I just to go back to the cardiovascular age point, my case, I found that my cardiovascular age dropped in the right direction the fastest when I started walking, when I just had more movement, right?
Yeah.
The movement of any kind. It didn't always have to be running or,
Yes.
it had to be move, right? Find a reason to move. And so, I've shared with you, right, it varies between 13 and a half to 15 years, depending on what I do for how long. But that's a pretty good range to be in, because I think below 15, it doesn't have space on the scale to go lower.
Yes, you're in rarefied air in that area. Like I'm between 9 and 12, and it also but I now figure out a little bit how it fluctuates for me. So I'm curious if I will have like a period of time where I can go like really see if I can really push it.
Miklu, I wanted to ask you, straps versus rings, form factor.
Mhm.
How do you think about form factor and
Mm.
its effect on the experience?
Yeah. Um, in like we want to have the most wearable thing possible with the most amount of sensing capability, and the ring form factor, I sometimes joke it's the best and worst thing that we have going for us. As a form factor, it's like superior for many reasons. It's just like a lot of people don't want to sleep with their watch, and right there you kind of like wipe out, or a strap. You would sort of wipe out like half the data that you can capture. But it is also very form factor constrained. We have to do a lot in very little space. I also have a personal belief that eventually there will be like 100% saturation of people wearing some kind of health sensor. That will be a range of different form factors, but much as like the iPhone got to like, let's say, 100, or smartphone, like 100% saturation, I do think like biological tracking like this will also get to that. And I do think that we are super well positioned, both with current offering and future offering, to capture that.
One of the things I have this friend, and she has an Aura ring, and so one day I asked her to share her because she was talking about some health questions. So I said, let's look at your data. So I said, let's look at your resting heart rate and HRV. So she said, oh, can you find that data for me? So I opened up a phone, went to the app, and I saw the data. And I remember this meeting was sometime in August, middle of August. And when I opened her app, it showed that her last data point was July 7th or something like that. I'm like,
Yes.
how is it July 7th? And she loved the ring so much that she wore it almost for the looks than for anything else. So she had not charged it for the last 6 weeks. So I think one way or the other, people are going to. The ring has one big advantage. It is a very, very attractive form factor. But I mean, jokes aside, the fact that the rate of growth of the Aura ring has been as explosive as it has been does speak to the point that people do want to get something that will give them a sense for how they're doing. And one of the questions on the community, in fact, a lot of people ask the same question, and I'm assuming it came from people who are not currently who currently don't own a wearable, and that is, what is the economic justification for someone who does not currently use a wearable to start using a wearable versus just taking care of the basics without having a wearable?
Mhm. I think it's a great question. I would say that the most expensive thing a person can do is to neglect their health, right? Like that's just like all kinds of expensive. And particularly if you happen to live in America, where, I think the number of people that go bankrupt because of medical bills is like 500,000 people a year.
Yeah.
So there's a very good reason to be proactive about this. And one of the largest votes of confidence is the absolute overrepresentation of healthcare professionals in our member base. I don't remember the latest numbers, but it's like it's incredible how many of our members are doctors and nurses and dentists and people in the healthcare profession who I think kind of intimately kind of see the day-to-day of like how people struggle with their health and have an appreciation of the power of the tool. And then I would also say that we have this purity about our business model that I think is important, where you pay us to take care of you, and that's a really pure model. Like, you're not the product. We're not like trying to sell you something else. We're not selling your data to anybody else. And I think that's something that is always worth thinking about with some of the largest tech companies that have very complex business models. That what is it that you are actually, paying for?
Yeah. And here is the two arguments I would make, Miklu, about why I'm glad I use a wearable. One is in hindsight, and one is based on today. Where, as many people in the audience know, I was diagnosed with heart disease by mistake. Now, knowing how many steps I walked or what my resting heart rate was probably wouldn't have exposed any of it. However, if I could go back in time and let's say I was wearing the Oura ring, I would have seen my cardiovascular age to be pretty bad, I would imagine. At that time, this feature did not exist and Oura did not exist. But and I would imagine that is the case because it's such a deeply ingrained metric. And so one thing is it can serve. And now with the newer wearables having atrial fibrillation and having the ability to detect all these things, one of my nieces, her resting heart rate just goes into the 90s at times. These are not things that one would even know. And so one justification in my mind why everyone should have a wearable is to find those hidden things that we don't even know. Steps, you'll figure out. Sleep, you'll figure out, even if you didn't have a wearable. But these hidden things, you won't figure out. So that's one justification. The second justification actually came out of a conversation we had with our expert guest last week. Last week, we spoke to the CEO of the fastest growing health insurance company in India. And they provide discounts on your health insurance premiums based on living a healthy life. Now, conceptually, it should have always been true, right? Health insurance companies would have healthy people. But I thought they did it better than almost any other health insurance company because, just to put it in context, Miklu, if I lived in India and I was a policy holder with this company, I would pay my first year's premium. And then from next year onwards, they would look at all these markers, my blood pressure, my steps, my so on and so forth. And what type of discount I would get every year based on my numbers specifically, 100%, which means I would pay zero as my insurance premium. In the past, I've heard of companies giving you a 5% break on your premium because you walked 10,000 steps, enough days. But that almost felt like they were checking a box, right? This now is very tightly tied, right? And the CEO's view was simple. He said, we pay out claims for 6% of our policyholders, but we give back some percentage of premiums for 10% of our policyholders for good health. The 6% get it because they have an issue, right? And so net, they're the fastest growing health insurance company because now if I'm willing to live healthy and I'm willing to put on a wearable to show them that I'm living healthy, I'll get a financial break as well. So there is the physical, mental health improvements, but there's also the financial improvements. And I thought these are two good reasons which, if anyone were to ask me for my opinion, I would say do it. Don't get overwhelmed with the data. Take only what you want, but be clear which markers matter and then just follow those.
Yeah, that's spot on. I have a third one that is maybe like a longer term. I also try and think about a lot of this stuff in a slightly longer term, and I wonder if eventually it's going to be almost like a moral responsibility, similar to wearing a seat belt, or a governed responsibility like wearing a seat belt, because these days we would it's absolutely given that we wear a seatbelt. Like, why wouldn't we? Like, yeah, I've never been in a traffic accident, and I've been on this planet for 45 years, but I've always worn a seatbelt. And I think it's eventually probably going to get to a place where it's just a moral responsibility from our families and communities that we have these powerful life guarding technologies.
Yeah. In fact, last week I shared something that I thought was fascinating, and that is we keep hearing people say, "Oh, I would die for my children," right? I would do anything for my children. But then you ask the same people, "Are you willing to live for your children by making these small changes?" And that is much better,
Yeah.
right? And
Are
that
you
is
willing to go
why.
to the gym for your kids? Yeah.
And so to me, wearing a wearable is sort of that thing that you're doing for yourself, so that you're giving back, right?
Yeah.
Um, I want to quickly go through a few other questions because I know we're running out of time. Um, the have you I know recently you launched the whole blood testing as well, right? What was the thought process versus just letting people say, look, you can do your blood testing wherever you do it? uh, I know, I mean, I can imagine why, but I'd love for you to share what is the reason you decided to integrate that. You also already integrated with a CGM. You're sort of getting a very nice ecosystem built.
I mean, that's the goal. Like, we want to make it very easy for people that there's like one stop to get that comprehensive view. And also we know that we can help some of our, together with our partners, to take some of these things that maybe were more cumbersome or, you know, not fully modern yet, and just bring a really integrated experience. And that's, both of those examples that you listed have just been about doing what our members ask, which is like having the right information easily accessible in their favorite health app.
Yeah. Yeah. And when are you, is there a plan, Miklu, to launch in India? Because we have a lot of users from India as well in our membership.
Oh, absolutely. Like, we've grown so fast, but of course, like, we definitely want to enter that market. And, we have a lot of Indian fans also in the US. So, like, absolutely, that's going to happen. And we, good to remember that we're still this like whole teenager, that the company is relatively young and we've grown fast, and it's been quite US focused, but we have a fantastic international retail team now that's like going into new markets. So hopefully not too long of a wait.
Lovely. Now, all right, let me move to member questions. First one, Aniket wanted to confirm that he heard this correctly, and I can confirm that you heard it correctly, Aniket. Did Miklu eat dates and no dairy to drop his cardiovascular age? The answer is yes. Now, as Miklu said, it may not apply to you, but it's one of the experiments that you could do for yourself and check whether, in your case, whether that dropped your cardiovascular age. Right, Miklu?
Correct.
Okay. We have Dr. Ali Zaidi, who's a longevity expert and physician. He says, can you please share the research and evidence that the sleep staging from the Oura ring is accurate? How does the Oura ring compare to the ring that is used for home sleep studies prescribed by sleep doctors?
That information is available through the, I believe, both the blog and the website, and through the science team. And our science team is 35 PhDs that also publish and do sort of world-leading research on all of these axes. So the scientific validation is definitely there. I am, as a chief design officer, not the best spokesperson for that, but it's something that people can find.
What we'll make sure to do, Miklu, is we'll go to the website, find the study
Yes.
into the notes.
Yeah.
Anu's question is, does the ring help identify chronotype? And the answer is yes.
Correct.
Right. So in fact, in the app, it very clearly shows you that information. So you don't even have to like interpret it.
Yes.
Then Vani's question, what biometric elements does the Oura measure? How does it work? Can we get a brief explanation?
It's starting to be so comprehensive that it's hard to be very brief about it. But in the broad buckets, we have sleep health, we have stress health, and we have your heart health. And we have quite a few different metrics in all of those. I would also we haven't talked a lot about the stress related health features, but we have what we call resilience, which is well, first of all, I guess one of the major metrics that we haven't talked about is the readiness score. This is a score that's based on a lot of different things we measure that basically give you the idea of how equipped you are to have a great, gigantic, impactful day. But resilience is then related ability to kind of make sure that you are stressing yourself to a degree as much as you can, and you're also recovering as much as you can, and because that creates ideal resilience. And then we recently launched cumulative stress, which is a very nice feature that basically shows when you get into one of those loops where stress is actually cumulative, that can lead to burnout. It actually visualizes that in a very clear way. And for example, I just went through a really crazy October with a lot of travel, and while my resilience stayed in a relatively good place, I could see how that accumulated. And then during the Thanksgiving week, I was able to take some time off and really, just breathe and exercise and eat. And I shaved all of that out. And a lot of these features are just something that are very hard to are actually hard to appreciate. Yes, you feel like you're tired and you've worked hard, but it even for me, who spends quite a bit of time with being aware of how things are going, I find this very, very helpful and actionable.
I want to sort of just provide my explanation of the stress and the resilience. I think that's one of those super powerful markers. The cardiovascular age, we spoke about being a very good marker, but that's not going to change from day to day. It usually, is a much more slow-moving marker. But the is one of those that you can actually use to experiment with different things. For example, because it's calculated for every 15-minute or 30 minutes, I can't remember. I think
15.
Every 15-minute window, you can actually see what you're doing at different times of the day and seeing how it translates to stress. Sometimes what you think you're doing, you might not think of as stressful, but it is placing a stress on your body, which is some sort of a cumulative effect or a marker coming out of your HRV and your resting or your heart rate and your respiration rate and so on and so forth. But if you believe that marker is a good marker, you can start using it to provide feedback. For example, if you drink alcohol, you'll not only see an impact on your sleep, but you'll also see an impact on your stress levels at the time you had the alcohol. Similarly, you don't really appreciate how much of a load food places on your digestive system till let's say you fasted. Okay, you will actually see your stress levels low. But the moment you eat, your stress levels go high. This is not necessarily mental stress. It is stress on your body. And I think I would highly encourage anyone who uses the Oura ring and look at the resilience and use that to figure out what experiments you want to do, because stress is not bad. You want a certain amount of stress in your life, in your body, because that's how it learns resilience. But the key is to make sure you're not always. And the other interesting thing is I've seen when I play soccer, of course, at the time of playing it, your body is going to be under stress. But it's amazing how long your body stays under stress. Even after playing, it can be hours. I mean, it can be 4, 5, 6 hours. And so it's critical for you to cool down. I never appreciated the value of cooling down, of gentle stretching after a game, as I did after looking at how long my body was staying stressed. And so it's this type of hidden feedback that I think, whether it's cardiovascular age or resilience/stress that really provides the practical value on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
All right, I don't think we have any other questions, and I know we are past the time. So, Miklu, thank you so much. I'm sure everybody on the group loved it, and as always, I find our conversations very enjoyable, very insightful, and thank you for doing what you do and for being who you are. It makes these conversations fun.
My pleasure, and same right back at you. And I think what you guys are doing with this sort of by each other for each other is like very special. And I've been both like moved and really inspired by the movement that you've all built. So it was great to be a visitor tonight, and I also really enjoyed the conversation.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miklu. Bye bye, everybody. Good night. Good morning.
Bye.